Undeath. It is a fact of life that the spirits need to control the body through fey or shadow magic. Perhaps that statement is a little too harsh. The wizards have managed to animate constructs using arcane entities alone, such as the golems. But to use a tortured analogy, though an entity controlling the body does not require the assistance of fey or shadow magic, it would be like driving a cart whose wheels are hexagons. This is why the fetish is so often immobile. It is widely known that when a mortal dies, the chakras lose their connection to the fairy realms and instead orient themselves to the black dungeons. Only powerful resurrection magics, usually of a divine origin, can reverse this. As the rot accumulates, the shadow grows, and soon, the body that was once driven by the energy of birth is now driven by the energy of undeath. It takes some time for the chakras to fill with shadow and become an undead. For some undead, the rot may become so great that it destroys their chakras. This severs their connection not only to the black dungeons, but consequently to their animating spirit. However, a powerful necromancer can infuse the body with shadow energies and control the movements of the creatures with their mind. A spirit of some sort may seize on this body and possess it, perhaps temporarily, perhaps not. Other times, a well-preserved corpse will last, and the residual soul stuff will be enough to guide this creature as it goes through life. And even still, a ritual could be performed that would accelerate the decline of the corpse and tie the old soul to the body. For good or for ill, the necromancer was the first scientist. Many undead wish us mortals ill will. The vampires drink our blood. The wraiths hate our happiness. The lich has given himself to madness. Ghouls and ghasts are cannibal corpses. They were either turned by some ghoul or blessed by Elazar for their flesh-eating ways. But the zombies and skeletons wish us no ill will. They are like less than animals, little better than plants. Now, a spirit of some sort may possess this zombie or skeleton, or a necromancer may direct it. But even then, what purpose they serve could bring great benefit to the living. Dangerous simple labors can be performed by them, and oftentimes, the dead are sent to the front lines. There are those who have suffered a severe familial loss and no longer feel attachment to this world, yet feel some duty to their family. They leave this world with no will to live, and Dantanos turns them into the Banshee, an intelligent and bodied undead. As patriarchy develops, the Banshee tends to be of the feminine genders, for both social and magical reasons. They wail an omen of death. They take it upon themselves to protect their familial lineage, but they may find their family line degenerate and perverse for whatever reason, and punish their old haunts. The ghost and the wight, which is essentially a bodied ghost, are their own individuals, with their own tasks and duties. Long before the Kuda ever showed up, the aliens had religion. These creeds were nothing but superstitions, for they did not have any access to the planes. How could it be otherwise? Magic was largely non-reproducible. If no one told you, how could you know that placing sperm in horse dung during the middle month of the 5th slave of the day of Dvapara, but only in every 3rd year of the Kotal, would do anything? Any alien who dismissed their magics and religions out of hand was simply in the right. These false alien religions, which came from a time before evil was a real substance, guessed at these concepts and deduced that necromancy was evil, if you could believe that. They even burned people at the stake, and years later, revolted at even a fantasy that suggested otherwise. But contrary to being evil, the necromancers are a source of great benefit to us all. They are people that save lives and bring great progress. But how did the mortals of the Third Age utilize this? These bands were scant more than 100. Not to mention, they did not yet require mass production. They didn't even have complex labor. How can one simplify a complex labor if there is not yet complex labor? The undead served two purposes, it seems. These primitive people understood there was a serious use to the undead. When raiding or being raided, it was better to use the dead than to risk the youth. But, in these bands of dozens, one would constantly be reminded of their loss. Every day they would be confronted with the image of a sibling, a parent, a child, or friend. Except that image is fading. It reeks of decay. It is an ugly and stupid monster. The thing comes across as a bad joke, a mockery of the person that was. So, it became a taboo and a sad affair to turn the tribesmen into the undead. But, in matters of life and death, These mortals knew that they did not have the luxury of shame, that shame is the enemy. They would need all resources available to survive. Thus, the magics of necromancy were to be used, but only in the most dire of times. To this end, they started to develop the two mummification techniques that we are so accustomed to today. One technique is used to stave off undeath and decay. The corpse lasts longer when this process is done, and it stays inert for all of existence. It does not rise as a zombie or skeleton. The second type would allow one to retain their soul, and we shall elaborate on it later, though the body must sleep. They created tombs to keep these bodies, protected from the elements and the animals who would molest them. They typically kept these in one central location, which became sacred to them, and would become part of the seasonal migrations. Footnote: of course, these were no more permanent than their migration patterns. As the generations went by, they would abandon one place and make a new one. End footnote. There, the dead could be awakened when the time came. It both preserves them so they can awaken later, and stops them from becoming undead, from becoming this cruel joke. So mummification was all around a success. Then there were the mystics, the shamans, the ritual prostitutes, the holy men and women, and those in between. These people were always separate from the tribe, and yet part of the tribe, occupying the mystical space between outsider and insider. They were foreign and yet familiar. These people ritually severed their familial ties. So, there were no qualms about keeping their distorted image around. Before, they were more perfunctory performers than kin, and now, they simply served a new function. They became an idol, a fetish, a source of magic and wisdom for the tribe. These undead served a religious function. They were now used in performances ranging from feeding the dead to necrophilia. Footnote: the most famous of the necrophiliac rites comes to us directly from Odin himself. End footnote. These undead corpses were used in rites where they took on the role not only of generations lost, but of death itself. This is how it was through much of the Third Age, until the latter periods of the Last Liar and earlier periods of the Last Slave. Here, the mortals had started to develop inter-tribe distinctions of caste and class. They developed patriarchy. They developed slavery. Their networks greatly expanded and now included thousands of other people under one general cultural group, and started to engage in a state-controlled form of primeval merchantry. Just as they started trading people, they now traded corpses. It wasn't such a strange development. Throughout the Third Age, there were no qualms with animating the corpses of outsiders. They would find a few stragglers here and there, collect some bodies slain in a mock war. These corpses became simple servants. So, the development of the trading of corpses merely accelerated this, and made it a bigger part of life. But as is often the case, this quantitative addition to society started to qualitatively change the situation. Undeath, as we have said, was originally viewed as a necessary evil, but now undeath meant the removal of the body from the community. Now it meant that one's flesh would be an eternal servant. Not in the former sense, when they were respected as odd things called upon in times of need, wherein being a slave to the community was a metaphor, wherein being a slave was an honor. No, now it just meant being a slave, a symbol of servitude. Before, seeing one's parents as undead was a somber moment of desperation, of calling on the ancestors to protect you, of the ancestors to make the ultimate sacrifice. Now, seeing a parent as undead meant that they were servants to someone else, for something else. So, the powerful proto-nobility either mandated that they should not be undead, or paid some fee or gave some service to the state so as to not sell their corpse. Undeath became a symbol of the lower castes. Undeath became a symbol of servitude. So, the nobility started to become permanent mummies, never to be turned. Sometimes they went more extreme and had their bodies cremated, so that under no circumstances might they become this thing. Just as well, the holy people, the mystics, and the shamans became way more important, and their duties simultaneously shifted. The mystics and priests have always been the ones to handle the undead. This is because the roles they served naturally led them to this. They were the priests, and so they were the studiers of the soul, the bridge from mortal to God, the masters of life and death. As you know, a soul is connected to the body through fairy and necromantic magics, so this overlap also made them experts on these magics. Such a thing in turn made them excellent healers, which was a major reason they played the role they did in the tribe anyway. This created a feedback loop. They were important because they could heal, so they became better at healing, and become better at Fey and shadow magics. The office of priesthood, in this way, has always been associated with Fey and shadow energies. So, when there was a great influx of undead, who was the natural choice to control these creatures? Who was the natural choice to destroy these creatures when they got out of hand? The mystics and priests, who already were not undignified through Undeath, now found Undeath to be a way more important part of their office than before. One wonders why the priests are more adept at Fey and shadow energies than their wizardly counterparts. This is the reason. The office of priesthood evolved with handling Undeath in mind. Footnote on more adept at Fey and shadow energies than their wizardly counterparts, though they will never surpass the Fey caster or necromancer. End footnote. On its face, they have nothing to do with each other, but as a historical development, the overlap is obvious. One could argue, quote, "Oh, they know these energies through healing," end quote. But even then, it is not obvious that she who holds the temple keys is also a medicine man. It is not obvious that she should specialize in undeath. But there is something to be said that the one who handles impurity and cleanliness in some matters might also handle them in matters of disease, especially when the subtle differences were not known. Once this becomes their purview, and they can successfully deal with disease, there's not a great reason to separate the two. What we see among the aliens of space, however, who have less magic, is that the role of priest and medical man are separate. Our scholars still debate if they even start out together. But even among us, certain religions refuse to heal certain ailments. The spiritualist, herbalist, necromancer, or feycaster, and others step to the plate and act the role of physician. As the priests become more powerful in society, partially granted this by new patriarchs justifying their rule, partially by the fact they control the undead, partially by their rudimentary healing magics, their office becomes more elaborate. Consequently, the undeath of the priests becomes even more elaborate. They were doused with perfumes and oils. They were given the finest of furs. They were adorned with the most illustrious of jewelry. Now, make no mistake, they were still zombies and skeletons who could hardly appreciate these things. These moves were for the living to stand in awe of the priest. It is designed to make you think that even the priest's undeath is different than your undeath. This is a principle undertaken regardless of if the priest is caste-based, hereditary, or voluntary. The priests then discovered a new mummification process. At the point of mummification, they could bring the soul back to the corpse. Now, the person could undie on, spared from the horrible decay, being well preserved. This is one of the few ways one can become an intelligent undead without becoming a servant of evil, like a lich, without becoming a scourge on society like a vampire. But this mummy requires great slumber, only being able to be active for a few decades at a time before it embarks on its extended sleep. In many ways, these people's view on undeath was identical to their view on prostitution. If a slave were to do it, she would be unclean, but it would also be her lot in life. If the priestess of love were to do it, she is holy, dignified, and righteous. If a commoner were to do it, she becomes a filthy whore unworthy of society. And if a noblewoman did it, that would not only be the end of her, but of her family's reign. Such a thing also impacted religion and how the gods are worshipped to this day. Take for instance the Syrinx. The undead are extremely holy to Santa Mirte, while valor and martial prowess is more important to Heron. Worship of Santa Mirte started to fall out of vogue with those who would not be undead, while for those who knew their bodies, though not their souls, would become zombies called out for her. So, Santa Mirte started to become a favorite of not only the mystic, but of the downtrodden, the peasant, the laborer, the common thief. On the other hand, Heron, who had no opinion of cremation, who emphasized death in combat, valor, and honor, started to be worshipped by the nobles, who came about through their martial prowess. Thus, Heron had started to be a favorite of warriors, patriarchs, and nobility. Such divisions are not obvious. Why should the goddess of undeath be the favorite of the mystic and the poor? Why should the warrior be loved by the political superior and the patriarch when he is not even the leader of the pantheon? We must look at their actual development. Of course, mortals do not come to these conclusions on their own. While many of the gods are neutral about undeath, some have very strong feelings. They communicate to their followers, and this has obvious impacts. But I hope I have also made it clear that some have legitimate reasons to simply ignore an inconvenient dictate. Even this is not yet the full story. While for many this is the current view of the undead, it is not universally so. You see, as time goes on, who the rulers of society are changes. Through violent conflict, one sect is overthrown and replaced by the new one. And it is not always a case of the new boss being the same as the old boss. Usually, it is this case, where it is just one person replacing another. They kill the other man and take his place. But sometimes, they do not just kill the man, but also the place. Sometimes, in these societies, a new type of nobility develops, who reproduce their status of nobility through different ways than the elite. This new type then comes to overthrow the older nobility. They do away with many of the old traditions, which they view as fetters on society, i.e., these traditions stand in the way of the new rulers, and they make their own statuses, traditions, and customs, the status, traditions, and customs of rule. They make their way of reproducing society the dominant way. Now, they might drape themselves in conservatism, and their new relation to society of course changes the way they used to do things. But now, they have come to power. We can't get into the specifics here. The way this process works, in terms of details, is unique to each time it happens. It must be analyzed not from the abstract mortal, but from how the mortals concretely act. It is way outside the scope of that small paragraph. This process is therefore best understood through examples. While we can't go into detail, we can provide some examples that come from your scions. The great Genghis Khan led a new class that developed itself on meritocracy against old hereditary leaders. Caesar had championed the rise of the equestrians through the proletarii against the senators. Another example is when the Punic Wars annihilated the patricians and recreated the aristocracy. So, as this happens, sometimes cremations seem to be an archaic and barbarian thing of the past. Sometimes, the fact that one became a slave when they died was seen as virtuous and a source of pride. It is not like the soul becomes enslaved, it is just that the body is then given to benefit the future. Thus, becoming undead is an act of compassion, of love, of community. Then, new classes reacted differently to each successive new society, changing it in different ways, each class born out of how the previous one resolved itself and the natural limitations of the localities. At this point, the story diverges too much to tell here, for we would have to follow the historical development of every single society. Going from the primitive hunter-gatherer to nomadic and settled patriarchs is an easy explanation that follows general cues, but how do they develop from there? Do they go back to their classless ways? Do they develop civilization? Do they become keen on metalwork, or do they ignore it? There are so many variables to track that a general treatment can hardly be done. But none would consider necromancy to be this cosmic evil, because it is not. It may be infused with this thing, but it is understood by all that death and shadow, darkness and night, are simply the way of things, of life. In a way, the undead are a type of life, for it isn't as if the Nephilim and angels persist on fey magics, as they are not organic. This does not mean they would not find certain, if not all, necromancies disgusting or profane, but then again, for most cultures, the undead are stored in the cemeteries and temples. Just as there are distinct views on the virtues of mortal sacrifice, each subtly different in its own way, but each following general trends, there are different views on Undeath today. Since I still have some space left on this scroll, I should mention that this does not apply to all the mortal races. Feral orcs do not follow this trend at all. For the great orc warriors, and the orcs always have great warriors, the consumption of mortal flesh is a communal rite. Sunlight falling on your steel. The best of the best makes the ultimate move and separates himself from the afterlife, so that he may kill beyond death. Death in life is your ideal. He accepts the blessing of Elazar and becomes a ghoul. He retains ritual relations with the tribe, but becomes separate from it and goes his own way. His kills rise as ghasts, and the orc tribe herds them the way they herd pig and boar. When the tribe's great warriors have not been killed in battle, but are beyond the healing of the shaman of Rugthol, they are cast into these ghastly pens. They may choose to move on to the porcelain roads, or join the ranks of the ghasts. Life is like a wheel. Now, the ghasts of those outside the tribe, especially the non-orcs, are seen as weak fodder, but these orc ghasts are used in battle and raids. They are cleaned and pleased, albeit restrained so as to not eat their tarts. This is seen as a great honor among the feral orcs, and it is reserved for their most elite warriors. Of course, these ghouls are now priests of Elazar. These ghasts are not those dead orcs, but are bodies possessed by spirits loyal to Elazar. Ghouls and ghasts are innately evil creatures, so such things attract the Kleepoth. Their unpredictable and violent cannibal nature typically repels the other mortal societies, villains notwithstanding, but orcs see hurting them as a great challenge. The orc ghoul has better things to do than to manage the orcs' ghasts, so the orcs appoint a herdsman. While such a herdsman is necessarily weird and develops his own beliefs, they see herding as a great challenge and regard the herder as a holy man. Quote, "Look at that man. He is strong and so willful. He might command a creature like the ghasts." End quote. Oftentimes, a heresy will churn up, and there will be a secret cult to Elazar, inducting their fellow orc through the pale moonlight of Luna at midnight.